Thank you, Dave. Well, excuse me if I'm a little nervous. Normally when I'm talking in a microphone, there's no audience staring back at me. Thank you very much, all of you, for showing the commitment to be here today. Dave is absolutely right. We cannot compromise at all on our rights. I've been involved with the tax honesty movement and the larger Patriot movement for going on 15 years now. And I have a love of history, and American history in particular. And with history as a backdrop, I think it's safe to say, and I believe you would agree, that we live in very interesting, fascinating times and very possibly truly dangerous times for our nation, for our republic, and for our liberty. As Dave mentioned, we could talk about a myriad of subjects today. However, I'm limited to an hour, so I'm just going to talk about two. I'm going to talk about the income tax, and I'm going to talk briefly about the right to keep and bear arms. What is the income tax? Well, I suppose technically it's Subtitle A of the Internal Revenue Code. But of course, the income tax has its own dynamics. And the question is, to whom does it apply? Who has Congress actually imposed the income tax upon, or who has Congress made liable? And those may not be synonymous terms in this case. We might start by saying to the government, who does the tax apply to and under what circumstances? The problem is, as most of you know, we get no answers whatsoever. Since I know a lot of you have been in the tax honesty movement for some time and are very proactive, how many of you have sent Freedom of Information Act requests to the United States government, to the IRS, to the Treasury Department? Okay, that's a goodly percentage, about a third of you. How many of you have gotten completely non-responsive answers? Okay, that's about the same exact percentage. In other words, the United States government, the IRS, and the Treasury Department have no intention of telling us anything about the income tax. As their spokesman said a few years back, we are answering the tax honesty movement by putting them on trial and putting them in jail. That's a paraphrase. So we don't have any answers from the government. So where do we find our answers? Well, there's all sorts of sources we can go to, and probably like me, most of you have gone through the long and arduous task of going through the Internal Revenue Code and the regulations and reading the plethora of information that's on the internet and whatever levels you may have gone to try and find the answers. And as you know, the answers seem slippery. It's difficult to really get a handle on what's being said. And I don't have time today to get into all of the detail of the Internal Revenue Code, and I think I'd probably bore you to tears if I tried. So I'm just going to cut to the chase. Subtitle A of the Internal Revenue Code applies to very, very few people. And by the way, the reason I keep referring to Subtitle A is because, when you read enough court cases, you read where the income tax, the phrase income tax is actually applied to taxes other than Subtitle A. So I like to be very specific when we're talking about this kind of tax. The government loves it when we are non-specific, by the way, so it behooves us to be specific. Subtitle A applies to 4 classes of persons. I apologize for using some legal jargon like classes of persons, but I think it's important in order that the message gets out correctly. Those 4 classes of persons are as follows: non-resident aliens with domestic source income, foreign corporations with domestic source income, withholding agents on either of the first 2, and U.S. citizens residing abroad with foreign earned income. Now, how many of you fit that category? That's what I thought. One of the interesting things about the government's refusal to answer is there are occasionally good reasons for their refusal to answer, such as there is no answer. One of the things that I have found most fascinating is looking at where the Secretary of the Treasury has chosen to reveal who is to use what return and under what circumstances. Well, the Secretary of the Treasury has chosen the vehicle of Treasury decisions by which to do that. And I'm blessed to have many, many dedicated people who work with me, especially on the research end. And so we took darn near a busload of them down to the law library in Los Angeles, and we started going through Treasury decisions from 1913 forward. we looked at every relevant Treasury decision from 1913 until today. And we found the Secretary has designated just about every kind of return and who's to use it and under what circumstances. And we found a lot of Treasury decisions that talk about the Form 1040 and who's to use it. We found Treasury decisions that say non-resident aliens are to use it. We found Treasury decisions that say the withholding agent on a non-resident alien is to use it. We found Treasury decisions that said revenue officers, when interviewing people, foreigners, leaving the country, they can use it. And I could go on and on, all sorts of different circumstances. But what was noticeable by its absence was the fact that in 90 plus years, we could not find a single Treasury decision in which the Secretary of the Treasury has said that an American living and working here, earning his own domestic income, should file anything. 90 plus years, not one single Treasury decision that would indicate that. Well, I thought it would be interesting to actually ask the Internal Revenue Service about that. Yeah. Okay, who wants to tell me what word I got back? Single word from the Internal Revenue Service from asking a question. Frivolous, exactly. By asking a question to them in writing, because you don't have to use the Freedom of Information Act, you can just send them letters. And then, of course, we did the Freedom of Information Act in addition to that, through various different circumstances, different times, different angles. The IRS just cannot produce any, and this is the way we face it to them, any authoritative citation. We sort of left it open to them. What would you like to furnish? We'd like to see a Treasury decision, since we can validate that that's the Secretary of the Treasury's chosen vehicle for revealing this type of information. We'd love to see a Treasury decision, but we're not really picky. We'll take any authoritative citation that you can furnish us. As I'm sitting here talking to you today, we have nothing. And of course, you're all familiar with Lindsey Springer and his work. His work is indicative of the fact that there is no authoritative citation for folks like you and I to file a Form 1040. When we're talking about the income tax, I'd like to take a step back for a moment and say, I don't know if it's prevalent anymore, but for a long time the mantra was the income tax is unconstitutional. I want to say clearly that the income tax is 100% constitutional. When you read through the code, you read through the regulations, Treasury decisions, Treasury orders, the manual, you find that it is impeccably constitutional when applied to the people that Congress imposed the tax upon. So the problem isn't the tax code. I always find it amazing when I hear stories, well, amusing more than amazing, when I hear stories in the media about the tax code and how it's too complex and it needs to be revamped. And, well, that may be true, but I don't really care because it doesn't have anything to do with me. So it can be as complex as they want. It's got nothing to do with me. As complex as it is, it does ride inside the boundary markers of constitutionality. The income tax as written is impeccably constitutional. The problem that we have is the enforcement, the administration of the tax code. Probably like you,